Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to this Tuesday afternoon session for the Wales Biodiversity Partnership Conference. For those of you that weren't in the last session, I'm Ant Rogers. I'm the Biodiversity Implementation Officer for the Pembrokeshire Nature Partnership, part of a network of local nature partnerships around Wales working to coordinate and promote activity for nature recovery in our country. This afternoon's session, we're all talking about monitoring and collecting data. So tracking biodiversity is the title. We had a couple of really nice presentations earlier from Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Trust and the British Dragonfly Society. We're continuing along the same theme now of citizen science and data capture and usage with Cristina Munilla from the Sea Trust Wales. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Cristina.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting us to present at this Wales Biodiversity Partnership Conference. We are very grateful of being here, and today we are going to be speaking about the analysis of long-term data for cetacean species in the southern Irish Sea. So the agenda for today is going to be, I'm going to talk a little bit about Sea Trust, who we are, what we do. Then we are going to speak about some of the challenges that we face when we monitor cetaceans. And then I will share with you some of the insights that we have gained through our continuous monitoring surveys in the Irish Sea. So let's start. Sea Trust. Sea Trust is a very small but very busy marine conservation organization. We are based in Fishguard, and our main goals are education, raising awareness, research, and conservation. And we do this by delivering accredited courses. We host the school visits. We work with the university and the fishing industry to reduce plastic pollution. But we dedicate much of our resources to the continuous monitoring of cetaceans. And we do run several projects, very interesting projects in this sense, which are the Small Boat Constant Effort Targeted Species Surveys, the Porpoise Photo ID project, and then we have a couple of ferry survey routes. And today we're going to be talking precisely about one of these surveys. So why is it important to monitor cetaceans? Why do we do what we do? Look, the monitoring campaigns are a necessary tool to establish the conservation status of a species. And when we monitor, what we are really doing is gathering as much data as we can to understand the behavior, to understand the distribution and patterns of these species. If we have this understanding, then we can track and detect trends in distributions and the patterns. And this is going to help us deciding on the conservation status of these species. Now, the problem with marine mammals is that they are difficult to study. It's difficult to detect changes in population. And actually, the last report from the State of the Nature in the EU also emphasized the lack of data affecting specifically this group. But this is not surprising at all. Monitoring these animals can be quite challenging, and there are many reasons for this. Some of these are listed on this slide. For instance, we can have the observer's expertise, we can have the survey conditions. We might have a very bad visibility, we might have a really bad sea state, wind, but also the species behavior itself. It's quite important. It's not uncommon to see like big pods of common dolphins traveling at very high speeds in the middle of the ocean, fishing, breaching out of the water. As you can imagine, these animals are very difficult to be missed by an observer. However, we also have other species which tend to move in smaller groups, maybe 1, 2 individuals. They tend to swim really gently. They spend very long periods of time under the water, and this means that the probability of detections also decreases. So you can see it's quite complex. It can be quite complex depending on the species. But if we enter into the monitoring methodologies, possibly the most common one, and actually it's very good, are the linear transects. This is a very good method for estimating density and abundance of populations. However, it has a major downside, and the major downside is that you need dedicated vessels and you need dedicated teams, and this means that the cost increases dramatically. Therefore, we cannot really carry out that many surveys using this approach. Of course, there are alternatives, and we are going to be talking today about one of these alternatives, and these are the ferry surveys, the platforms of opportunity. For those of you who may not be familiar with this concept, a platform of opportunity is simply a vessel that is not dedicated to monitoring per se. It can be a fishing boat, it can be a passenger ferry, and we carry out our surveys from these platforms. Advantages: they are very economic, therefore we can carry out many of these surveys. Disadvantages: obviously we are not in control of many key aspects, such as the vessel speed, the point where we monitor from, or the route that this is covering. In any case, as you can see, there are many challenges. There is not right or wrong methodology. Each one has its own advantages and disadvantages, but what is true is that by using platforms of opportunity, this can play a key role in the continuous monitoring of cetaceans. So let's have a look at what we have been doing. So on the right-hand side of this slide, you will see the Stena Europe. This is a passenger ferry, and it covers the route from Fishguard to Rosler, which is approximately 63 miles, as you can see on this little map down there. And we have been covering this area from 2003 to 2017. Now, the good thing is that because it's a platform of opportunity, we have been able to carry out over 500 surveys. And we have been able to do this consistently all year round. So this means we have been able to carry out at least one survey a month for most of the years. There are a few exceptions, but in general, we have been able to do that. And what's more important, we have been able to do this in optimal survey conditions. And this also means that we can compare the surveys. Good, so let's have a look at the area. This is a bathymetric map of the Irish Sea. Darker colors indicate deeper waters. So the transect that we have been covering has a maximum depth that ranges between 90, 100 meters, which is possibly not a lot if you compare it with other places such as the Atlantic Ocean. But what is true is that many interesting processes take place here, because these areas are highly affected by the semi-diurnal tides, the winds, the waves, the salinity. So what have we actually seen here? So during this 14-year period, we had around 4,000 sightings and have recorded over 15,000 individuals from, I think, 7 or 8 different species. What is true is that there are 4 that are the most common ones, and these are the ones that we are going to talk today about. And in case you were wondering which ones they are, you have them in here. From left to right, we have the harbor porpoise, the common dolphin, rhesus dolphins, and on the bottom, the minke whale. So the first thing that we can do is grab all the records that we hold for this species and put them in a map. And this is what we end up with. So what you see here are all the records we hold for these 4 species, and each dot in the map indicates a sighting. The size of the dot indicates the number of individuals that were recorded within each sighting. And it's very interesting because just by doing this, you can already see very interesting patterns. If we have a look at the common dolphins, for instance, you can see that to start with, it's very rarely we see them by the coast. And then another very striking aspect is that the bubbles or the dots that we see are the biggest ones amongst the 4 featured species. And this shows their tendency to move in larger groups. On the other hand, we have the harbor porpoise. The harbor porpoise is completely the opposite. Coastal preferences, also smaller groups. We are talking about an average of 2, 3, 4 individuals per sighting. And then interestingly, the minke whales and the rhesus dolphins seem to have a preference for western areas. Minke whales, we will usually see them like in small groups, usually 1 individual, rarely 2 individuals, and very rarely 3 or more. And the rhesus dolphins, an average of 4, 5, 6 individuals. Now, a more visual way of seeing these are density plots. For those of you who are not used to density plots, you can interpret them as histograms. So let's have a look at the common dolphin one. On the x-axis, you have the longitude in decimal degrees. So this means that I think I have an arrow somewhere, but I cannot find it here. Well, on the left-hand side of this plot, what we have is the Irish coast, and on the right-hand side, what we have is the Welsh coast. And here you can definitely see that preference for oceanic areas. They tend to distribute more homogeneously towards the center of the transect. Harbor porpoise, on the other side, very coastal preference. You can clearly see it here. And then we have the minke whale. The minke whale is actually very interesting because you see that a strong preference for western areas. But you also see on this plot like a small bump towards the Welsh area. And again, then we have rhesus dolphins with a very similar distribution. Now, well, I don't know you, but the first thing that comes into my mind when I see this plot is what is going on under the sea. And because if we have a look at the bathymetry data that we had, this is just the same version of the map I showed you before, but this is a 3D version. Now, if you draw a line between Fishguard and Rosler, and you were able to slice this map along that line, you will end up with a depth profile. And we can actually overlay this depth profile on top of these density plots. And this will help us to identify more interesting patterns. So now we have the depth here. And now we can see how the distribution of the common dolphins, the harbor porpoises, is also closely correlated to the depth. Interestingly, for minke whales, the area where we seem to hold most of our records also coincides with an area where there is a very steep increase in depth. And interestingly, the second bump that we were seeing also coincides with a very steep increase in depth. Now, although there seems to be a pattern in these environmental features, the spatial distribution of cetaceans is possibly more driven by the distribution of their prey and their movement, and this can be highly dependent on other seasonal variables. So the question here is, what would happen if we had a look at the different seasons? Will we encounter important difference between species? So we can have a look at that. These are some seasonality plots. On the y-axis, we have the average number of individuals per survey, and then we have the different months of the year. And we can see that the 4 species have a very different seasonal profiles. I would say possibly the most interesting ones are the minke whales and the rhesus dolphins. So if we have a look at the minke whales, we see that most of our sightings took place between April and possibly July. Now, there is a thing going on in March and April, and that thing is called, and during that time of the year, what's going on is that the number of hours of light increases. This means this is when we have the phytoplankton booms. And this phytoplankton is going to serve as food for krill, which turns out to be the main prey of the minke whale. So we could have a potential explanation there. And then we have the rhesus dolphins. Usually we would see them between July and September. But it's true that we also see them quite a lot in October and November. As per the harbor porpoise, we know by experience, or we think, that the populations remain relatively stable throughout the year. It's true also that we see an important decrease in the number of sightings during the winter months. However, why are we seeing this? We can hypothesize about it. There could be other confounding factors. Are the survey conditions slightly worse, and that it's making, and that is causing that drop in the number of individuals that we record? We don't know. It could also be due to feeding habits, to breeding. So now the really interesting thing, I would say, is that we can use all these features to try and build a picture of the habitat preference of these species. And this is what we have done here for the harbor porpoise. What you're seeing on this map is just a heat map which shows the habitat preference of harbor porpoise. Sorry, but I forgot to add the the axis titles, so I will explain it. The x-axis would be the longitude and the y-axis the latitude, so that means the top left bit would be Rosler and the bottom right would be Fishguard. We have generated this map by building a model using different environmental variables, and it gives us a very good picture of what is going on. Can this picture be improved? Definitely. How can we do that? Firstly, by increasing the number of explanatory variables. The more environmental variables we include, the more we will be able to explain the variability in the different areas and seasons, and distinguish them from other confounding factors such as the survey conditions. Eventually, we will be able to use this as a baseline that will help to reliably detect the changes in the distribution and trends. But for the moment, we can have a look at the trends that we are seeing. Some interesting things. I think I'm running out of time, but if you have any questions, I can answer them afterwards. In general, the most interesting thing that we are seeing, there seems to be a switch in the seasonality of the common dolphins. In the later years, we have seen them less during, I think I can go back, during the summer and spring, and increasing during the winter, and also very important increase for rhesus dolphins. To conclude, we can see that the continuous monitoring allow us to understand the distribution and behavior of a species, understand the factors that drive the seasonal patterns, and most importantly, detect changes in the distribution and trends that are going to be key to ensure the protection and conservation of these species. Thank you very much.